I want to talk about the experience that I've had both making this documentary and also resisting making this documentary over the past couple of years. One of the most painful and difficult parts of it was the fact that what happens in a psychedelic process that's positive and healthy is it begins, or it has the potential to start cutting through or growing through and peeling away some of the old layers, some of the coping strategies, some of the structures that have protected the identity, that have been sustainable within a culture that is often very hostile towards the more undefended, beautiful and challenging aspects of who we are. I learned at a very young age that a 6-year-old who really saw something with care, with compassion, that wanted to connect, could terrify an adult, and that a terrified adult with their coping strategies could never be overcome with the maneuverability, with the leverage of a 6-year-old. Because a parent has the ability, an adult has the ability to traumatize a child very easily, and also do it in a way that it gets buried, where there's a stab and then a burial of the wound and then a denial of the wound and then a punishment of any speaking about the wound. And in this vortice where the child gets lost, the main residue of all that is terror. Terror of the danger around seeing, around connecting, around being seen. And in this process with Peter Sandhill, that happened again in a certain way, because freed again from the cultural masks and the cultural and culturally enforced layers of dark shadow, which are often the inversion of the denied light shadow. I saw the beauty, not only of myself, but the beauty of Peter Sandhill. I saw the beauty, I saw perhaps a concept that might make some sense, because that's really all our rational brain is good for, is we see things. And that's about who we are and what is. It's about the chemistry and the dialogue of who we are and what is. What we see is the nexus between those two poles. And with who I became and who Peter is in some way, I saw something incredibly beautiful, incredibly touching. And I invited him to step into that, very much like I had done with my mother from kind of early age to age 4 or so when I lost it. And I invited him to be a king, to take a stand. The essence of a king is in the kind of modern mythology of our country, it's Jesus washing the feet of the disciples. The essence of good kingship is to protect and serve the most vulnerable parts of oneself within the constituency of inner personas, and to protect and serve, to champion the most vulnerable faces of the community, which tend to be misunderstood, shamed minorities. The role of good kingship is to use the entire power invested, received as a result of the role, the honor of the role, to flow that power back to what is the weakest link in the kingdom. The weakest link. It's that principle that when you're towing a heavy boat up a mountain and you've got a heavy 8-wheel drive truck that can tow 20 tons, and you've got a 2-ton payload, and you've got a 3 to 4 ton chain, and normally that chain is fine, but there's a weak link. And whether that mission succeeds or not has nothing to do with the strongest link in the chain. In fact, letting go of our conceptualization of ego, it makes perfect sense for every single strong link in the entire chain to weaken itself by 200 pounds and give that to the weakest link in the chain, which may be 400 pounds. As it's received a ding, something hit that chain and crunched it into a concrete wall. And the chain is still assumed to be strong. And we as a community are like that chain. We're like that chain. And yet a community falls apart, starts to unravel when the weakest link breaks and starts to disconnect, divides. The community is no longer as strong. The mission will fail. That payload will roll back down the hill and cause damage. And in that sense, a chain is only as valuable as its weakest link. A country's safety or a community's safety is only as safe as the safest individual. And safety goes both ways. Because it's not fun. It's not fun, and it's not our nature to hurt one another. There's only one person who hurts other people, and that is a person who does not feel safe, is not safe, meaning there is something going on that is not being seen and respected within that person. They are not safe. If they were safe, everyone else would be safe, even in the logistical mechanics of it. Because the very thing that creates safety for them is to be seen. Well, that includes seeing the fact that they're so fragile, that their coping identity is so on the edge of breaking and is formed in this particular way that it needs to reaffirm itself If it's a wound that is embodied, then it needs to reaffirm itself by externalizing, by hurting, in order to be secure in its identity. And what that's saying is that person doesn't know how to pivot into another identity that's healthier for them and others. But it's also saying that not a single person in the community cares, sees them, and sees and cares them enough to help with that pivoting. Because if someone can pivot out of a wound identity into an essence identity, or an identity that is more graceful at holding more of their essence, they will. They will and they do. So if they are not, it's not a shortcut any more than abusing the abuser is. It's not a shortcut. People may be terrified and hurt by the coping identity. But we also need to look at the whole picture, which is amidst all of the attacking and hurting the one that hurts, amidst all the terror, there is no capacity to really empathize and serve, to be of service to the one who needs to pivot, who wants to pivot, who is trapped by a need for certainty that is being supplied in no other way within a volatile and unstable community in which there's a lack of skill, both within the community to see and within the individual to engage, to pivot out of that identity. And if anyone's looking at that person at all, they're maybe just avoiding them, which is not strengthening that weakest link. So, in this way, seeing and asking Peter Sandhill for that support, recognizing that the memories of trauma were so strong and so certain in their strength that holding on to some of those identities were the only thing that gave me the amount of certainty to be able to cope. And yet I saw other possibilities. And what I asked Peter to do was to be a king, to take a stand, to be my shoulder to lean on until I could build muscles in a new identity. And a wise king, a skilled king, an honorable king, knows that this is the entire basis of a king's role. The palace, the archetype, the opportunity, the authority that is vested in a king is solely for this purpose. And it is a contract with the community. We bless you with extraordinary influence, trust, and power. In return, you pledge to move beyond yourself, to serve the weakest, the most vulnerable, the minority, the misunderstood factions within the self, within the community. And as a result, the community, the country will be stronger. That trust is repaid. Peter is learning to be a king, perhaps. When I asked him to be a king and to take that stand and to make time for me over the next 9 months, when I asked him to take money out of the relationship. When I asked him to honor himself high in the community by helping me step up, I asked him, I said, Peter, help me find my voice so I can become who I am, which is the greatest gift a king can give a community, is a newly christened member, someone who's coming into themselves. That is the greatest gift to a community. And Peter said nothing and walked away. When we finally talked, he expressed his anger, disappointment, and shame at me for letting him down. When we finally spoke with Felicia, he vented with fear, with anger, with hate, with hostility, with self-pity, the complete rejection of my role. But in doing so, he was completely rejecting and ignoring his essence as king, the template that is a part of who he is, that I see, that I invite and challenge. There's something very beautiful about valor. There's something very beautiful in the Arthurian mythologies, chivalry and valor. And those who know Peter know this side of him. I also understood, as with my mother, that what I was giving Peter was a gift. The chance to serve is the opportunity to become a king. I was asking on my own behalf, but as I look at the many identities within me, I have always noticed the pairing and the paradox of the great divide between the part of me that is most childish, most absurd, most unlovable in this culture, the smallest part, the most taboo and unacceptable part, need, childlike, stubborn, self-centered, delighting in exuberance, the exuberance of boasting, of flooding myself with gifts and playful games and all of this stuff. Everything that's inappropriate. With a voice that is always present in its extreme opposite. That when I show someone how to love this part of me, they are learning to love this part in themselves. And when they love this part in me and this part in themselves, the dirty root that produces the flower, when the soil is fertile, magic occurs. I have been loving and adoring and serving the very smallest expression of self that I can find in these last 9 months. And I've been loving it in another. Learning, as I learned from my father. I didn't learn how to be from my father, I learned how not to be. My father showed me what not to do, and it was a good lesson. It helped me avoid many of his pitfalls, as we both experience a similar level and kind of pain, and flail around looking for coping strategies to numb the pain. I learned what not to do. And Peter taught me how not to be a king. He showed me how not to behave. And I learn by teaching. I tell people what I see, what I think should be done. 95% of people ignore me, rebel, don't pay any attention. But I pay attention. And I paid attention. I learned what it was like to be a king when I asked Peter to step in that role. I started to understand the role by seeing it in the role Peter could play. And then I saw the role as he did the opposite, as he participated in a shaming, a retreat, a disowning, and a rejection of the most needy, of the most vulnerable, of the least understood. Personas within the community and within me, and within himself. I mean, it goes both ways. And Peter had talked to me about the fact that Sarah would not love his needy little boy. And so he had disowned. He had taken back the right of Sarah to come near that little boy because she dropped it again and again and again. Every time he'd say, I really need this right now. I really need you to hold and be present for this. She dropped it. And this hurt so much that he said, no, you do not have the right to come in here. And so he protected this wound from betrayal after betrayal after betrayal. And that's a healthy boundary. But apparently, because this always goes inside and out, apparently he did not receive that help anywhere else. His peers and his partners, his fellow human beings and I let him down in that area. Because a king is knighted and honored by a queen or a king. That is who sets the template. That is who provides the sound that gets internalized, that is followed by a true king. And until you receive that sound in blessing, and thank heavens it doesn't have to come from a human being, you are not a king. You don't know the program. You don't see the effortless beauty of truth within that paradigm. The grace and the abundance that is created within that paradigm. And by Peter taking a stand for me, his pledge, his sacrifice, his love, his space holding, such as it was, my trust in him let me leave this troubled, myopic, and confounding culture to go out and see things, to see things on Peter's behalf, to see things on High's behalf, to see things on Sarah's behalf, to see things on my behalf, and to bring those gifts back into the community. And yet, Peter didn't know what was going on. And he didn't know that he didn't know. His humility, the way he sees me, the way he sees himself, is too small. And so 40 to 400% of the probability potential that was coming in was not seen, recognized, honored, or valued by him, was in fact profoundly disowned and disrespected to defend his comfort zone, to defend the coping persona of the wound that no one has taken a stand for him to see. And so there's this paradox in this space where it's like this incredibly strong computer program is in the process of downloading, but it can be interrupted with a little flick, just yanking out that USB cable, and it stops and has to start all over again. And I asked for the container to let that process take place. And Peter saw martyrhood. Peter saw martyrhood. Poor me, it's never enough, I can't do this, what's wrong with Dane? Why doesn't he do this? Why doesn't he do that? Peter saw martyrhood. But he wasn't vulnerable. When I said he couldn't see, he said, no, I can, and I'm loving, and da-da-da. He put on the performance to cover his resignation, his martyrhood, his hopelessness, his exhaustion. He put on the performance to cover the part of him that I can bless, that I can take a stand for, that I do take a stand for in myself and in those rare people that I have loved. And in the discounting and the dishonoring, Peter added 40% of his own weight against this process. So rather than not only not helping, his projections and the density of his actions, which reinforced the reality that he saw, denied the very beautiful realities that I was asking, that I have a right as supplicant, as client, as participant, as friend, as teacher and student, that I have a right to be served in those areas. I have a right by my character, by my commitment, by the goodness that I bring and can bring to the community. I have a right as king in a very different way than Peter. I serve by seeing. I have a right to that support and that love. And it is a right that both Peter and the high facilitators denied in different ways at different points to varying degrees. This isn't a high issue. We don't owe you anything. We didn't agree to this. This isn't our stuff. This isn't high stuff. And then Peter being completely clear that this wasn't his stuff either. Yet I have a right, as every pregnant mother has a right to safety and community protection and support during her pregnancy. Otherwise, we become an evil community that eats the life that could lead us to transcendence, that devours and pulls what is emerging down to feed what has been, the tired patterns that feeds the princess to the dragon, rather than slaying the dragon to protect the princess. The princess is the sacred feminine in every one of us. And we are in a culture that arouses itself on the distorted eroticism of violence, of watching the innocent, the sensitive, the princess, the feminine, be devoured, be thrown away, be shamed, be abandoned. And we call that maturity. That to be an adult in this culture is to learn to stomach that sickness and disease and get on with our day while that's happening. And yet, while our culture, almost every man and woman growing up in this culture, has had their fair lady slaughtered, has had their king stuffed into a sack and beaten, has had the servant humiliated for caring, for seeing something noble that has long been betrayed within the environment, within the cultural environment, for seeing something noble and serving that. Poor fool. And this is the lost, dark journey into addiction, into a dark wood of clouded nightmares in which we don't know where we're going. And a king and a knight, a queen, a devotional maiden, devotional, that counterpart to chivalry in men and women, can bless, can bring light into the tangled vines of that forest where in the darkness in the sounds of violence and grunts and beastly hackings away, in that descent into the reptilian brain. The dignity, the beauty of a goddess. Not a pimped up diva. Not a self-centered bitch. The beauty of a goddess that gives of herself and serves, that honors and worships, that celebrates and feels the beauty in the God, the beauty in partnership. I learned how to be a king, a beginning king, 20% so far, by reversing not only my parents, but reversing the high facilitators, by apologizing constantly and owning all of my mistakes and my inadequacies, by acknowledging all of the areas I am too addicted, too terrified to serve, by acknowledging my inadequacy, and by lifting it away from the one I was serving, the one I was protecting. I've had the honor to serve. And I have been honored and blessed. The act of embodying a true role, a true face of self, a true persona, not an adaptive persona, is an act of phoenix-like renewal. It brings more energy in than it takes. Peter may be learning in his shadow, may be learning that all the time he thought he was saving, all the shadows and righteousness he thought he was protecting, all of the old structures he was afraid of losing, are being destroyed, time being destroyed. What could have required an hour of kingship requires 500 hours of slavery to be a betrayer. And the worst thing for someone in that position is for the person they betray to be hurt so much that they cannot challenge the person to step up and learn to be a king. So nothing is learned. 10 years ago when Peter hurt me, I did not understand enough to challenge him to be a man, let alone a king, to be a therapist, let alone a king. And part of the paradox of this moment, in a moment in which I have been soundly and thoroughly rejected and hurt, abandoned and betrayed, lied to, Peter does not have my trust on a human level. Having done nothing for 10 years, having said he was ready to serve when he was not, having betrayed me, Sarah, and himself, having not kept his word, and having pretended more than 20 times that he really got it now, if you listen to Peter's recordings. I get it, I really got it right now, and I get that it's your stuff and it's not mine, and I get that you're blackmailing me, not standing up for yourself. Because a real king is proud when one of the courtiers, one of the subjects, on an essence level there's no hierarchy, but within the roles there is hierarchy, and that hierarchy must be honored. A king has a different role than a subject. And in the role of facilitator or healer, Peter is my king. In the role of teacher, I am an unrecognized and dishonored king, dishonored by Peter, as he dishonors himself, as he dishonors High, as he dishonors every single person around him, by refusing to have the humility and grace to see and know how much he doesn't see and know. In that area, I am an uninvited guest, but a king nonetheless, in fool's clothes, because there's this paradoxical dance between the rag-bone boy cast out beyond the pale of cultural norms and the wise one who watches and teaches through that voice. Discerning wisdom by who has the grace, the skill, the beauty to recognize the king within the beggar and serve that beggar. That is always the true king, the true queen. In this area, both Sarah and, more reliably, Anne is a queen, more reliably. And yet, as much as we are all kings and queens, when we are safe, when we are secure, when we are loved, when we are connected with ourselves, we are all our shadow. We are all the beggars within the self. When we are terrified, when we are in scarcity, when the unloved little ones within us are crying without recourse for reassurance that is not given, then we prey upon one another and ourselves like dogs. And the king and the queen, their image is lost in the scuffle. And we struggle with our Western minds, with our crude geometric boxes, the layers upon layers, the layers upon layers of selves and eyes, through which we see the light, to understand, to make sense, to see the pattern. In this area, in certain states, I have seniority. And it is that responsibility that will not let high betray itself without a challenge for the soul, for the integrity and the beauty of the resonance mission, of the probability field of what wants to come in, of high's true light. The true light is always the most beautiful. If you want to know what's true, look for what is most beautiful in its potential. And that is more true than its shadow. No ending point, no resting point on the endless continuum of truth, on the endless continuum of beauty and goodness. But that which is more beautiful, more true, more good, more giving of life, which is always the strong and the old, giving willingly of themselves to give birth to a third energy, and nurturing that third energy into its full maturity. Knowing that this new hybridization, this new advanced fractal of the pattern is more powerful, and thus can redeem and bless the old. The circle continues. It has integrity. This is the wisdom of the father and the mother that lay down their life for the child and discover the domain of kingship, of queenship, of love, and the partnering with the great ones that are always present, as allies to protect the innocent when we choose to invite them, when we ask for help. They have been by my side, along with the great spirits of Anne, Sarah, Peter, the great spirits who stand with the great journey of championing those willing to step, those able to step, those ready to step out of the tangled wood and into a clear light. It's very difficult to balance and integrate this face with the face of my terror, with the face of hate, with the face of rage, with the face of exhaustion and helplessness. And yet they integrate when this one loves, blesses, celebrates, and sees them all in myself and in others. This one is capable of forgiving and seeing and loving. The one with the eye shut and seeing the brilliance of fractalized fears, the disorientation of pain and grief, and a dizzying falling into a chasm. That one can see nothing but terror, hate, reaction, and holding on to anything that feels solid. It is the dishonored guest, the uninvited great-grandmother at the christening, who casts a blessing. And the story wasn't told quite right. Every one of Sleeping Beauty's relatives gave a gift. But the nature of dishonored energy, the nature of how the uninvited guest emerges into our reality, the nature of its influence is dark. Puts us to sleep. Because the only way not to see it, the only way to deny it, is to hide, is to project onto it. And this interferes with the gift. Within the cultural framework, the old witch is unsavory, is beyond the pale. The pale being the stone wall they built in Ireland, the Christians built in Ireland, to keep out the heathens, the mushroom eaters, the ones who saw the fairies and pixies. They were out in the world demonized by Christians, a frightening world, a world where all of the many expressions of spirit that did not fit the guest list were banished and cursed, and the eyes were dimmed. Now everything in that world became something frightening and ugly, appears like a curse. And yet the enlightened one invites all guests and sees the beauty that is unseen in the projected label of curse. The enlightened one does not see garbage. It sees composite mineral breakdowns that have the capacity to save this world, to bring joy, to bring well-being. And the more we label as garbage, as evidence of our limited imagination, the more of reality we segment into a human synthetic paradigm called waste, the more inefficient our reality, the harder we have to struggle and work. Because having called it waste, we then have to get rid of it and then keep it out of sight, rather than explore how it can bless our lives today and today and today. And we can, of course, see that more clearly with the food that gets thrown out. And you can see the growth of America the return to a wisdom a few thousand years old. It's nothing new. That we're doing more municipal composting, we're doing a little bit more recycling, but we still look at it as something disgusting, something we have to deal with, as garbage. The king has dominion of all of his resources, the stewardship of all resources and the cycle of life, both within himself, within the community, within the country, within the environment. And the king creates and lives in a state of grace, a grace that is the natural byproduct of inviting everyone to the table, of opening to everyone. Teaching and love takes many shapes. This culture, not understanding the role of the king, which is to serve, not to serve the coping strategy addictions of an individual, but to serve the community. There are so many lost and misconceptions in the spinning of words, the creation of words, which as soon as some words are created good and others are not good, then the political spinning begins within the culture to capture, to expand and edit the meaning of the good words, to include whatever agenda is being fostered. If we want to steer someone in a certain direction, let's just say, I love you and you need to do this, as opposed to call that fear and anxiety and a coping strategy of such. In making these recordings, I'm just taking a moment. I was not sure that I could see and honor this expression of self and soul, this face that is inside each one of us. The face of the Queen, the face of the King. I didn't know how to be with this part of myself. I was terrified of letting this part down. I was terrified of failing. I was terrified of being lost in all the many snake-infested swamps of coping mechanisms and emotional cycles that fill me with dread. And that's where I asked for a hand, for help. And that's where I was left alone, not having the language to even be able to say this. And that's when my hand was taken by a queen. A queen that guided me to serve. That guided me to serve the woman I now love more than any other human being. That guided me to be of service to what my left brain considered undesirable, to what my culture had taught me was less than. And so I served. And the more I serve, and the more I served, the more I have been born. The king is born in the container of serving. I need to serve in order to become intimate with this role. This role that protects and takes care of me as well as others. I've received my greatest gifts in the process of giving. And it's still a wonder to me, and it's still a learning. And I wonder if Peter is missing out. I know he missed out on this opportunity to take a stand for me, to be loved in the way that I am now loved. To experience the miracle that from that which we mislabel as garbage, something more beautiful can emerge than anything we label as beautiful, excellent, ideal, the dream. And that's my learning. That's my learning. I still don't know how to integrate this part of me with so many other parts of me. And that's also what I'm still learning. But I'm excited. I'm excited to learn this. I'm excited to receive this gift. And one of the reasons that, maybe a third of the reason, because there's a whole host of constituent agendas around all these videos and recordings. One of the reasons is that it's only after regaining my sanity from all the programs and delusions of other people, and regaining my trust in goodness amidst all the betrayal and lies of people. And my tenderness and my love from amidst all the hate, the grief, the terror and loneliness of being so rudely separated in the interference pattern of vulnerability and trust and betrayal by Peter, by Sarah, by Anne, by the facilitator body. And yet, pain is the teacher that shows up in the absence of grace. Fear is the teacher that shows up in the absence of consciousness. Fear and pain are and have been my friend because they are true, because what I am terrified of and the pain that I am in provides a pathway all the way back home to that long ago place, long before the minefields of a culture ravaged by trauma, by instinct. And help me find the self that is outside. Welcome them back. And in that way, everyone is my teacher through pain, through fear, through love, through grace. And I've always been terrified of pain. And I've always been afraid. I've always been lonely in some areas. And it's following that thread deep into the heart of the dark wood. Deep into the heart of the dark wood. And finding at the center of the wounded beast that face of God, and had we shown more respect to Goddess, that face of Goddess, wrapped in thick, sweaty hide, covered in demonic masks. It is that self, the beauty of our innocence, that is feared more than anything else. Because once the torpid skins of rotting flesh and animals are removed from that bundle, what we see is ourselves, alone in a dark wood, free at last from the illusion, but seeing the fears and the pains and the illusion, those unconscious beasts created by all of our pasts, all of our many presents in the many people around us. And to be a king in this wood is to bless, bringing this light to one after another, to each snake, to each alligator, to each panther, to each rat, to all of the cursed faces of the forest, taking back the delusion, the synthetic construct of poison, garbage, and curse, giving that up so that we can love and see.